Hello and welcome everyone to the International Migrants Day.
Hola y buenas tardes. Me gustaría dar la bienvenida a todos ustedes. Me gustaría dar algunos anuncios administrativos. Para árabe, utilicen el canal para chino. Para Bahasa indonesio, utilicen el canal de interpretación ruso. Para Thai, utilicen el de alemán. Para Jne, usen el de japonés. Y para nepalí, utilicen el canal de coreano. Lo voy a repetir. Para árabe, utilicen el canal de interpretación de chino. Para Bahasa indonesio, utilicen el canal de interpretación ruso.
For the Khmer, the Japanese, and for the Nepali, the Korean interpretation channel. Welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today for a celebration of Migrants Day. Today we have around 11.5 million migrant domestic workers around the world. This represents 17.2% of a total estimate of 67 million domestic workers globally. It indicates the massive importance of domestic workers in the world of migration and the world of the care economy. Today, we are also celebrating the 20 years since the United Nations has adopted in 1990 the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and members of their families. Equally, today, we are celebrating 2 years since the adoption of the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration by the majority of the UN member states at an intergovernmental conference in Morocco, followed closely by a formal endorsement at the General Assembly on December 19, 2018. This covers all the dimensions of international migration in a holistic and comprehensive manner. Yet, today, we still experience some gaps in the protection of migrant domestic workers, especially in light of the pandemic, a global pandemic that has affected the world of care economy, of domestic work, and that has domestic workers persevere and show their resilience across borders and across movements. Today, we would like to start first with an opening speech. If President Myrtle is here, please show yourself. President Myrtle.
Good afternoon. Hi, this is Myrtle. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I think that we have to mention that this is very unusual, the way we're celebrating Migrant Workers Day today, but we have proved once again that we are a strong international domestic workers federation, and we have rise above all of this. We did not allow the COVID-19 pandemic to put us down. We are trying our best to be strong. We are trying our best to do the best what we could do. That is why we even managed, under the auspices of our General Secretary, Elizabeth Tang, to start fundraising, a solidarity fund. To all of you that's been loyal to us, we thank you very much. Today, we're going to look at very interesting topics. We're going to look at the unionizing domestic workers and how hard it is, especially migrant domestic workers. We're going to travel to different countries today. I heard in our first panel, we will go to Qatar, we will go to Lebanon, we will go to Kenya, we will go to Jamaica, which is quite interesting because we are going around and we are going to hear about many, many interesting things happening. But the message should be clear today, and what I've said also this morning. We as migrant workers, we have to start educating ourselves. We as migrant workers, we have to stand up. And we also have to enter the technology and the digital world. We have to make use and understand our cell phone is no more hi to the boss or hi to the, our cell phone is ours, and we have to start using our cell phone. Like many domestic workers say, what is Zoom and Unzoom and what is all this all about? But it's up to you and all of us to make sure that domestic workers will go with us. And I'm not sure if I must introduce a second panel, but this is the first panel. Rhoda, thank you also for your introduction. You were brilliant and you bring across it very well what we have won so far. But what we have won is standing still. And we have to make sure that we take it out of that drawer, that we take it out of that cupboard, and once more that we bring everybody back, especially Lebanon. We're moving in Qatar, but we need to move back into Lebanon, and we must make sure that we are mobilizing and educating domestic workers. And the other very important thing that I'm always saying to my General Secretary, we have to unite all the migrant workers organizations in the world, that we can speak with one voice, that we can become one. And with this, I said, have a good evening, afternoon, morning, and look forward to hearing all the panel discussion and look forward to many more years for the IDWF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Myrtle. It is our honor and privilege to have you with us today and to have you with us throughout the resistance of domestic workers globally. As you mentioned, that we need to be united and we need to stand as one, given the difficult challenges that everybody is facing today, specifically with the pandemic, with border closures, with a lack of firewalls, with people stuck on borderlands. It is very important for us to reflect today and to celebrate the strength of domestic workers in migration context, because their migration experience is shaped by the precarious position that they have in the global labor market. These precarities are experienced at every stage of the migration cycle. First, at the indebtedness that they face in their home country, along with the dependence on the middleman in the recruitment agencies, along with women composing most of the force, the working force in the informal economy. And they already start with fewer assets to begin with, making their economic survival something that is very necessary for us to tackle if we are to build back better and recover from this pandemic and envision a world where labor is fair and labor is free. Second, they experience limited term contracts, fragile employments, employer-tied visas in destination countries where they reside, where they go to build better lives, and yet face increasing difficulties. Then there is a precarity of a future reflected in the limited spaces of return and reintegration. Today, a lot of domestic workers are returning to their home countries, yet they have not necessarily been prepared to do so because we are experiencing a major crisis. Today, our first panel would examine their unionizing efforts, how they tackle the difficulties of migration in all of its stages, from the pre-departure to integration in the country of departure and employment, to their return in their country of origin, and to their reintegration. How are they unionizing? How are these unionizing efforts reflected in the various geographies of migration? Today, it is my pleasure and honor yet again to introduce the 4 speakers that we will have with us for this first panel tackling the borders of their unionizing and their resistance. Nikola Lawson is joining us from Jamaica. She is the Vice President of the Jamaica Household Workers Union, of which she has been a member for over 15 years. She works to promote human rights, especially in the context of economic, social, and cultural rights, by engendering policy, law, and practices at local, national, regional, and international levels. She is a promoter of domestic worker sector and works on all aspects that affect women's lives and carries out programs with domestic workers and their children, fighting against discrimination and for women's economic empowerment. Nicola herself has been a domestic worker for over 24 years, and being a member of the union has helped her become a better rounded individual and household worker, as she says. Also, joining us today is Rahel Zegeye. I will ask you to open your cameras so people can look at you. Rahel Zegeye is a human rights activist and filmmaker from Ethiopia. She has lived and worked in Lebanon as a domestic worker for 20 years. Rahel, during her one Sunday off for the 4 years in the beginning of her journey in Lebanon, She has used that time to write, direct a movie titled Lebanon to showcase the difficulties that face Ethiopian domestic workers in the country and what they have to endure under the kafala system. She later directed a play as well called Shouting Without a Listener, and she continues her organizing work and her artistic journey, and she has also founded Mesawat, an organization in Lebanon in 2014 to support the victims of the kafala system, the sponsorship system that she will elaborate on and talk to us more about later in this panel. Also joining us from Kenya is Margaret Kabue, Maggie. She grew up in Kajiado County in Kenya and has lived in Qatar for the past 8 years. She resides in the northeast coast, about 50 kilometers from Doha, where she works as a nanny and a home therapist. She has been active in the community building for 5 years, and in June 2020, she started organizing a Kenyan domestic workers group, the Kenyan Household Service Workers. They have had less than 20 members when they've started, and today they are proud to say that they have over 112 members. The purpose of the group is to educate domestic workers about their rights and to support them in these times of crisis. Last but not least, for this panel, we will have Zainab Ekumba, who has been a migrant worker and a member of the returnee network in Kenya, Union for Domestic Hotels, Educational Institution, Hospitals, and Allied Workers Union, KUDHEIHA. She has worked as a domestic worker in Saudi Arabia from 2014 till January 2020. She has recently come back from Riyadh in early February and has had both the best and the worst experiences in her quest to secure employment in the Gulf. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Nicola, the floor is yours. Could you please tell us more about what the migrant domestic workers from Jamaica are experiencing today?
Good morning. The Jamaica Household Workers Union is an organization that was set up to represent the needs and interests of domestic workers. It has been established to promote, respect, support, and protect the rights and interests of workers across Jamaica. It aims to synergize all efforts of domestic workers, trade unions, and other civil society organizations to transform the situation of domestic workers by setting decent work standards through achieving the ratification of the ILO Domestic Workers Convention number 189 and 190, and the enactment of national laws and other policies, as well as organizing domestic workers to give them a voice at the national and regional levels. Domestic work can be regarded as the largest single female occupational category of workers. As women workers, we contribute significantly to national development through the performance of our paid and unpaid work. We also have to struggle to combine our roles to look after our families. The laws regulating domestic work and concerning domestic workers and their rights are in many instances out of date and in some cases discriminatory. This lack of comprehensive modern legislation worsens the abuse and exploitation of these workers, who are predominantly women. Migration is a natural behavior, and people migrate for different reasons, including domestic workers. They migrate for their needs and desires to achieve a better quality of life, to ensure better opportunities for themselves or their families, like sending their child to a better, safer school, or finding a job that could have not only a significant salary, but also important benefits and career growth prospects, safety, and stability. Migration can even be rural to urban. For example, many of my fellow colleagues and members of our own union migrate to Kingston, looking a better paying job, as where they live in the rural areas, they could not get a good job, as many of us in the urban area. Amongst the major problems domestic workers face are long hours of work, heavy workload, lack of privacy, low salary, inadequate accommodation and food, sexual, emotional, and physical abuse, forced labor, and wrongful dismissal. There are two groups of domestic workers who tend to be exposed to even harder conditions of work. They are the migrants and the child domestic workers. Migration can be of benefit to migrant workers, their communities and their countries of destination and origin. However, migrant workers are especially at risk of exploitation and exclusion with limited or no access to social protection. They remain one of the least protected sector under national labor laws and suffer from particularly poor monitoring, exploitation of workers are right across the border, local and regional and international. They are vulnerable to human rights abuse due to inequality determined by gender, race, background, national origin, and social status. Non-payment or withholding of wages, no contract or switch contract, passport retention, large fees paid to employment agencies, violation of human dignity and freedom, degrading treatment and violence, forced labor and trafficking for labor exploitation in the worst case, are common violations suffered by these workers. The situation is critical, particularly for migrant domestic workers with irregular or undocumented migration status, or those who live and work in the household. They often have limited access to communication devices like mobile phones or internet to communicate with their family. The Jamaica Household Workers Union has been advocating for the implementation of decent work for domestic workers and free movement of domestic workers within the CARICOM, single market and economy. As a CARICOM member, a person can travel to any Caribbean country and can be there for 6 months as long as they are not working. But as Jamaican, once you enter, you are being set aside. And so ongoing activities include raising awareness throughout the Caribbean of the situation and needs of domestic workers, especially migrant workers, what to look for, who to talk to on arrival. We have to lobby CARICOM government to ratify and implement the ILO Convention 190 and 189. Support for the formation of Association of Domestic Workers throughout the Caribbean. Training and capacity building for national association. Fighting for the full implementation of the CSME regime for domestic workers so that they may enjoy their rights and the regime in the same manner as the other category of workers are currently able to do. CARICOM single market and economy. This CSME is an inclusive development plan which is intended to benefit the people of the Caribbean region by providing more and better opportunities to produce and sell their goods and work. As everything else, domestic workers again are restricted. According to one author in the main case of irregular migration is not disregarded of regulation by migrants, but rather the growth of inequality within and between countries and the failure of states to create adequate migration systems to meet demand. Given the weak social security protection against available to migrant workers in the region, it is necessary to put in place the balancing of independent, joint, and multi-party intervention. We call on the government to adopt streamlined and realistic responses to this issue across member states, which will require the coordination of immigration, labor and social security, legal and policy frameworks, and best practices developed in the region. The need for supervision of employment agencies, as lack of supervision of employment agencies is the biggest problem. Most time they provide misleading information about the job offer and exploit aspirant migrant workers through false promises. For example, an overseas employer requested the service of one of our members to work as a living caregiver to two elderly men. The pay and benefits sounded good, but upon arrival of the worker, it was found out to be false information given to the union. The workers was placed in a home with 8 elderly men to care for. No proper accommodation for her. The house was infested with rodents and roaches. Food was limited. Most times she had to use her money to feed both herself and the elderly men. She took care of. Luckily, they didn't took her documents, so she was able to reach out to the union where she lodged her complaint, where she was told to come home, which she did, book her flight and return home. Another example of another member who was sent by the union to Mexico to work as a housekeeper. She was sexually abused. Her document was taken from her, so she was unable to return on her own. Contact was made to the union. The union in turn made contact with Jamaica consulate there, who made preparation for her safe return home. These are some of the hostile ordeal migrant worker faces, and I'm sure that many migrant domestic workers all over the world have their stories to tell. Some things our government needs to do. 1, background check of employment agency. 2, Ministry of Labor must have a aware-raising campaign on the support service agency in each country that can assist workers who want to move within the CSME to work. Work in number of ways for providing information and documentation on the free movement regime. 3, to guiding them to areas where they can obtain information on employment opportunities in their new home country. Accommodation and housing information and advice and information on applying for the regime and obtaining the necessary certification. 4, partnership with employment agency, just like the farm workers. 5, formalize the informal workers across the Caribbean. 6, ensure access to information and legal advice for domestic workers who migrated. 7, training for information for immigration officers, awareness raising of the laws. The free movement of skilled labor includes the right of a CARICOM national under Article 46 of the revised Treaty of Shakaramas to seek work and or engage in gainful employment in any of the participating CARICOM member states. Even though domestic workers have their documentation to work, they are being harassed at entry by immigration officer. They need ongoing training and awareness of laws. 8, all workers should be treated with equality, dignity, and respect, irrespective of their gender and migration status. Government need to get their houses in order to ensure the people of the region will benefit. The standard is people being able to execute their rights across CARICOM. There must be sweeping changes across the Caribbean where governments ratify and implement the ILO Convention 189 and 190. The main point is that these are workers that have been given a right under the free movement regime. Domestic workers in 2009 and today in 2020, they can't use the right because of various reasons that the regime has not been fully implemented to facilitate them. For example, one of the things they need to do is to acquire the skill certificate they need to get a CARICOM qualification, and across the region, the CVQ regime has not been properly implemented. It's time to open the door for domestic workers so we can walk through. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much for the 10-point agenda that I will be pasting here in our chat box for everybody to get the recipe for change that needs to happen to labor laws and migration laws as prescribed by the Vice President of the Jamaica Household Workers Union. The contexts of the Caribbean and other states where migrant domestic workers exist vary. Therefore, we also have Rahel Zegeye that will talk to us about the kafala system, which is a system experienced in the Gulf and the Middle East region under which the domestic worker lies, looking for the differences and the similarities and potentially another agenda for change as well.
والأجندة إنه
Hello.
Hello, Rahel, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. إنه عطيتونا هيدا وقت كتير لنا.
Thank you for giving us this time to improve our situation. I want to talk about the kafala system. It's a sponsorship law.
I forgot to mention that we would need to be changing to the English channel because Rahel is speaking in Arabic. Go ahead, Rahel.
Okay. أنا بشكركم اليوم حطيتونا
I want to
كل
thank all of you today for putting the time and effort for this panel.
आज यो प्यानलकोमा समय दिनुभएकोमा
Today, I want to talk about the kafala system and what's happening under the kafala system for migrant workers. The kafala system, the Lebanese people put it, not domestic workers. The employer decides on behalf of the domestic worker and what kind of chance and what amount of money should be given to their worker, where to sleep, what time I should work, what time I should take a break. Everything under the kafala system helps the employer and the sponsorship and gives the sponsorship only for Lebanese people, not for migrant workers. They take our passports and they are in control of our full life and whole life, where we go and what we do, starting from the airport. And then we have to wait to go back home for 2, 3, 5 years. For example, I've been here for 20 years. I've been in Lebanon for 20 years. For these 20 years, the sponsorship is in control of my life. I want my rights. The law should be inclusive and international for all migrant workers. We don't want to be things. We are treated like objects. We are working like slaves in Lebanon under the kafala sponsorship. Especially now that we are trying to make an international change for domestic workers, to improve this law and change it. But the Lebanese people aren't accepting this. I've been living under this system for 20 years and nothing is changing. Especially now. From 10 months ago, we have an economic crisis and political crisis, plus the COVID-19. Millions of migrant workers in Lebanon don't have a job anymore, don't have their passports, don't have food, don't have nothing. No one's offering food for them. All migrant workers are trying to leave the country, but in order to leave the country, they aren't able. We are being tortured by our own government, by the Lebanese government. There's nothing legal with this. This is not okay. For that reason, all migrant workers are stuck in Lebanon, especially that there is aid for international migrant workers from the International Migrant Workers Federation and the anti-racism movement. We don't even have money for transportation. We cannot travel back to our home country. We are working and trying to make money to everything, to our own life, to advocate and make people aware of our own situation. There's many people who are working on this in Lebanon, like anti-racism movement. We cannot solve our problem in one organization. There's a lot of migrant workers inside of Lebanon. Please, we're asking from the government, the Lebanese government and Ethiopian government to give us right now a new visa. Those governments aren't seeing what's happening with us. We aren't able to leave this country, we aren't able to leave Lebanon.
visa لنيو migrant workers.
How is the Lebanese government accepting to give new visas for new domestic workers? This is so bad. Everyone in the house right now are working for 3 years, 4 years, 6 years without any payment. Also, we're asking from our sponsors. The Lebanese people don't know what is the sponsorship system. 75% of the Lebanese people don't know what the sponsorship system is, the kafala system. That's why we are being hurt and affected. Please leave our own kids. You don't need not to pay them their money. Don't leave them without food. This is what we're asking for. We are being treated like animals and like dogs. They're telling us that they won't give us money and they are beating us and abusing us physically. Every day there are people dying and migrant workers dying in Lebanon. Or the migrant worker is stuck inside of her employer's home and they have no other way to leave. And we're asking the government to help us so we can leave this country. And we just ask the Lebanese government not to give new visas to domestic workers. A lot of migrant workers don't have money for transportation, don't have money to rent a house and live. Where can we get dollars? Because we need to buy tickets in dollars right now. No one is feeling our struggle. They don't care if we don't have money to live. Especially the kids of migrant workers don't even have milk, don't have food, they don't have diapers. We're just asking the Lebanese government to consider our situation and to try to solve this problem. We ask everyone to help us solve this problem. Also, I want to ask the Ethiopian government that there are women every day that are living based off help and aid. If the Ethiopian government can recognize that there's a lot of people that need help from Ethiopia and can help us, would be great. Thank you very much. If you can help us to have a better life. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you,
Thank you.
Rahel. Thank you, Rahel. This is indeed an enraging situation with complex crises happening all at the same time. It is very disheartening to see how human rights stop at the citizenship boundary. Human rights are meant for humans and not only citizens. And it is enraging to see how domestic workers, adult women with full autonomy, have their autonomy taken away from them by such a system. The kafala system also exists in Qatar, where our next speaker is from. Maggie, could you please let us know what is the situation like in Qatar? Is there any progress made? How are you resisting this system?
Good evening, all protocol observed. According to our topic today is Migrant Day. First of all, you have to know who is a migrant worker. For me, what I understand, a migrant worker is someone who goes from one country to another. And the reason why Kenyan migrant to Gulf country, first reason is poverty. A good number of family in Kenya live below average. This makes every difficult for them to raise finance for school fees and some point to put plate of food on the table. For this reason, most of ladies opt to look for every means possible to raise family upkeep. Next point is low job opportunities. And that's why you will find well-educated Kenyan working as domestic workers. If they can get good opportunities to work somewhere else. The next one is alcoholism. Alcoholism is leading to separation, hence singles mom migrating in order to be able to raise their kids. And some are to get away from getting married early, escaping violent environment. Why migrants to Gulf countries? Compared to Europe countries, it is less complicated to find work and move to Middle East, especially Qatar, where we know is a peaceful country. We expect high wages, a better living and working condition, though this is the marketing strategy by agencies in Kenya. While we need collaboration between the two countries, the main reason, who can educate the prospective domestic worker from Kenya than those who have lived their dreams? We have to be responsible to give them feedback, input on what to expect about the host country culture, and the existing labor laws. Who can better give input to the government about the situation of Kenyan migrant domestic worker and push them to function accordingly? The recent changes in Qatar labor law number 17 of 2020, determined the national minimum wages for workers and domestic workers, effective March 2021. Rule number 18, 2020, terminating of employment. Removal of NOC. Point number 4, those who have given migrant domestic workers who are in dire situation to a chance to unchain themselves from dreadful curfew. Some have successfully transferred, but to some it's just brought them home faster. Kafara system still exists. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Margaret. I might come back to you in a few. I would like to ask Zainab to speak if you're still with us, because she's experiencing some problems with her connection.
Hello.
Hello, Zainab.
Hello, my name is Zainab. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm supposed to be sharing on the factors that motivate domestic workers to return back to Kenya. I have been to Saudi Arabia back and forth for the past 6 years. And the reason that I came back for the first time is not the same reason that made me come back home the second or the third time. For the first time, it was not a good experience because I was experiencing lack of pay for 10 months. And that is something that I could not work with because I had needs that made me go to Saudi Arabia to seek employment in the first place. So when my employer told me that I have to wait for 2 years for me to be given the lump sum amount of money, it could not work for me. The second thing was sexual abuse, mistreatment, violent behaviors from my sponsor and the children. And also there was no safe space for me to be able to communicate whatever that I'm going through. So I just decided that maybe going back home and rethinking these whole things would help. Another thing was I really felt homesick. 2 years is a very long time for someone to be away from family. So I was just thinking if they could reduce the contract time for first time for the people going there for the first time, it would really work because when you're homesick, you're not be able to concentrate on your work. You cannot be able to understand what is going on where you left the people because sometimes you don't have a phone or a SIM card at the moment you get into that country. Another thing was ill health. I had a chest condition. I could not be able to perform all the duties. And in Saudi Arabia, for the first time, I did not have specific off days. So you had to create time for you to rest, and it was only if your sponsor was not around. So it could not work for me. So I just decided instead of always quarreling with your mother.
Zainab, would you mind bringing the microphone closer, please, to your mouth so we can hear you clearer?
Sorry. Okay, so I was saying another reason that will make you go back to your country is ill health, or sometimes when you get accidents. Some people get accidents. I had a colleague who fell from a ladder while she was cleaning the roof, and she was incapacitated, so she could not be able to continue with her work. So I stopped working and I had to come back home. And when I came back home, the problems that I had left back in Kenya were still there. So I had to decide on a way that I was still going to get employment. So that is when I met Ruth. She's she organizes us at KUDHEIHA, and you're able to attend conferences. You're able to be trained and be taught on our rights. And So when I was going back for the second time, I had a backing up of the Convention 189. I was able to, there were WhatsApp groups where I was able to like rant and able to take off things off my chest, and other domestic workers were able to share on our challenges and be able to find a way around it instead of bottling it all up. So on the second time, I managed to finish my contract. So that is the reason why I came back home. My contract was finished, and I came back home for my holiday and just be able to rest because the fatigue is just too much. So when you come back home, you spend all the money back home. You don't have any savings, so you have to go back again to work. So the third time I went, I saved enough money for me because I wanted to go to college and do nursing. So that is the reason I went back to Saudi Arabia. But I could not complete my contract again because of the COVID-19. I had to come back home. Uh, that is my recent return.
Thank you, Zainab. And thank you, Margaret, as well, for the overview from Kenyan domestic workers and returnees on how both countries, the country of origin, Kenya, and countries in the Middle East, such as in Qatar, collaborate in order to ensure a better reintegration and a better sharing of information to improve the situation of migrant domestic workers. Like you said, thank you for these recommendations on shortening, for example, the first period of the contract, because it is a very long-term commitment when domestic workers travel to the unknown completely. And shout out to Ruth Hakame, who has arranged for this mini panel for us today, and to KUDHEIHA for their efforts in doing bilateral and transnational organizing and unionizing with migrant workers and returnees. If we are also to take one recommendation from this panel, it is very essential to keep the communication flows going from the countries of origins to the countries of deployment to ensure that domestic workers do not come back to the same problems that they have left back home, and to ensure that the solutions are also transnationally, that we fight these systems on a global level. However, borders are not the only barrier across domestic workers sector and the organizing of domestic sectors as well. It is also other metaphorical borders that they have to cross, and they have to be very imaginative and resourceful in the way they deal with these challenges and in the way they display their resistance. And I hand over the floor to my colleague Adriana for our second panel, specifically discussing how do domestic workers organize across movements.